So it's a huge honour to welcome Alex Wheatle MBE, the award-winning author of over 15 books, as well as being a distinguished playwright and poet. And he's one of our colleagues at the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies, and he's a lecturer in creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan University. Alex has worked closely with young people in a range of contexts. You may have heard of some of his most notable works: Brixton Rock, East of Acre Lane, The Seven Sisters, Checkers, Island Songs, The Dirty South, Brenton Brown, Liccle Bit, Crongton Knights, Straight Outta Crongton, to name but a few. And you can see in the chat, I've put a link to his website where you can find details of all of those books. Please get them, read them, encourage the young people in your lives to read them and engage with them. Alex was also recently, you'll have heard his name, I'm sure, as part of an integral part of the team involved in Steve McQueen's BBC Small Axe productions that were on BBC very recently. And one of the episodes, one of the films, where he saw his own life journey as the focus of that film. He joined Manchester Metropolitan as a lecturer in creative writing in January 2018, and he teaches on the Writing for Children and Young Adults routes of our MFA course and our MA in creative writing. And as I say, he's a valued and integral member of the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies, which is the interdisciplinary research centre, which is one of the hosts of this conference, along with the History Research Centre at Manchester Metropolitan and the Children's History Society. And he's going to talk to us today about his thoughts and experiences of working with and for young people with his writing. So I'll pass straight over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, April, for that incredible introduction. I hope I can live up to it. And really, I want to go back to my parents. It's 2021, and it is 10 years since my father passed away. And those of you might know already that I spent most of my time in my young days in a children's care home in Surrey. And I was only reunited with my father in 1987. And I was very nervous going out to see him for the first time. It was my first time flying to Jamaica. And I had written to him. And we agreed that I'd go out there for 1987 Christmas. And so my uncle picked me up at Kingston Airport and took me on the drive to my father's house in Old Harbour. And I'm an avid reader, so I really wanted to know about his childhood. I mean, all these things were missing from my life. I didn't have any kind of connection with my history, my roots, or anything like that. So I wanted him to sit down with me and tell me about my history. And it was quite a nerve-wracking experience as my uncle pulled up outside his house, and he was sitting on his veranda and he was drinking. I remember it to this day. He was drinking Dragon Stout, which tastes very much like Guinness. And I think he had about 3 or 4 pints because he was a bit giddy. And so I had a range of emotions inside of me. I was angry, but I was also very happy for the opportunity to finally meet him. And so the discussion began very tentatively. He was very defensive. But after I had a few Dragon Stouts, he began to unwind and he began to relax. And he then told me about his childhood growing up in Old Harbour, Jamaica. And the only thing that he had, that his family had, was the radio. And they would listen to the BBC World Service. And where he lived, Old Harbour is a fishing town. And so they would celebrate harvest time every August or September. They would celebrate a big catch or something like that. And women would prepare the fish over open fires, and they serve it out with bread and what they used to call, it's like a hard dumpling. And then the storytellers would come out, and the storytellers would tell stories about Anansi from Africa, which was a very tricky spider, and it would entertain the children. And that fascinated me. And me and my father spoke about, what do you think was the purpose of these Anansi stories that came from West Africa? And he imagined it to be in some kind of a comfort for children. And when you look back on storytelling, it doesn't matter what kind of background you come from or what continent you come from. Fairy tales like Grimm's fairy stories and so on, I think they were developed to obviously give warnings to children. There's some kind of moral lessons there, but also to give them comfort. And I believe that is very true. So what I do today, yes, I might describe some very difficult scenarios for children, but also I try to offer some kind of solace at the end and some kind of hope. And when I look and read at Grimm's fairy stories, when I look at different stories around the world, whether it's the Far East, whether it's Australia, whether it's oral or whether it's written down, and particularly the Anansi stories, they do give children hope. And when I think about my own childhood, now, many of you might know that it was very severe in cases. Lots of abuse occurred in my life when I was very young. And there's something that really held me together, that gave me solace, was stories. And these stories came in the shape of magazines. And so that's why when I visit schools these days, and librarians are sometimes not too enthusiastic about offering comics and magazines to their students, but sometimes it can give a student a space to escape to, like it did for me. And in my case, it really accelerated my reading skills. I must have been about 5 or 6 when I first picked up a magazine, and it was probably Sculpture magazine. It used to be a comic strip full of football and cricket and so on. And I still remember the characters to this day. There was Hotshot Hamish, there was Roy of the Rovers, there was Billy's Boots. And sometimes I remember sitting in the dormitory when I was 5, 6, 7 years old and trying to piece together a torn up magazine with sellotape and sticking it together so I could read the narrative when I went to my bed, usually about 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And I would steal downstairs sometimes to the bicycle shed, and they had front lights on them, and I would take them off, go upstairs again, and I'd use that light to read my comics. And again, it really accelerated my reading skills. It offered me an escape from my present existence. It really, like a story's supposed to do, it gave me some kind of hope and some kind of solace. And as a child, you don't know of what you're really trying to accomplish or what healing is going on during the reading process and being engaged with a story process. You're not even aware, you're just enjoying the story for what it is. And so this is why children's storytelling is so important, I feel. It doesn't matter what kind of career you might want to engage with. But for me, storytelling is the grounding for any kind of education that you might want to enter. For me, that was my foundation. So even through my difficult years, I attended a primary school within the children's home's grounds. You have to imagine it like a little village. And before the age of 11, you was not allowed to step out of that village. And so the only children that I interacted with were children who lived in a home. And so I wasn't used to speaking with children who had parents and so on. And they were obviously given a much better care than I was when I went to secondary school. And so I think that is why I found it difficult to really build on my reading skills that I had, because whatever school I was in, whatever class I was in, I was always a top reader in my class. I always had that. I'm not sure how, but that was a skill set I had from picking up a comic at 5 years old. And so my typical school years, secondary school years, from 11 to 14, they were very, very difficult. And yes, I still had the copy of the Beano in my back pocket and maybe Sculpture magazine and so on, but it couldn't shield me from the troubles that I confronted in secondary school. And so I found it very difficult. And in the end, I was expelled, in total 3 times, not because I did have an inability to study. It's just because I don't think the teachers at the time probably dealt with someone with my traumatic experiences. And the fact, I think today, when I go into schools now and I hear that students are given half an hour or so every week to pick up a book and read, drop everything and read, that would have really worked for me, because it would have made me calm down whatever situation I found myself in. If I could maybe locate a quiet room where I could have my reading time, that would have calmed me down and I could have gone back to class. I probably would have been okay, but that wasn't recognized back in the early 1970s or mid 1970s. So that was denied to me. And because of that, I did not have an outlet for obviously the angst and trauma that I had inside of me, because reading offered me that. And I went to Brixton in 1977, and it was like a proper culture shock for me. And when I went to Brixton, I kind of lost my reading habit, that glue that held me together. And so again, I struggled. And obviously with the culture differences, even though I was a young Black teenager, I wasn't acting like a young Black Brixton teenager, if you like. So I found it hard to find that identity. And it's only after I was given a sentence after the Brixton uprising of 1981 that I reconnected with my reading again. And that happened in the summer of 1981 when I was sent to Wormwood Scrubs prison. And I was sharing a cell with an older man called Simeon, and he was an avid reader. And he had shelves in his cell, which was very unusual. And he first gave me the Black Jacobins by the great C.L.R. James. And he was astonished at my reading ability and how quickly I went through that book and how quickly I learned from it. And from then onwards, I read everything on his shelf. And again, it kind of served me in a way that I could connect with who I was, my identity, especially as a child, where obviously I had accelerated reading with comics and magazines and so on. So that reconnected with me with the love that I had of written narrative, and that made me grow not just as a writer, but grow as a person. Because I believe that when you read about young people all over the world, like I was doing, that you can accelerate your empathy for other and each and everyone. And I remember Simeon telling me that. He said, Alex, read about young people here and there. Then if you understand what drives them, what motivates them, what they're trying to achieve, how can you hate them if you can understand them, where they're coming from? And that was probably one of my first lessons that he gave me. And it's something that I hold dearly now. When I remember I went to a school some years ago in Greenwich, and I did a workshop there. And I was talking about my life, talking about my journey. And the librarian there introduced me to a young man. He was 15 years of age, and he was interested in writing poetry and maybe becoming a grime artist. He had an incredible skill set, and I spent some time speaking with him. About 3 weeks after I had my workshop with him, I learned that he had been stabbed to death. And that shook me to the bone, it really did. And I was quite distressed for a number of weeks afterwards. And I remember I was asked by the Evening Standard to write an article about knife crime. And I remember I suggested that perhaps young people should be introduced to reading at a very early age and make that some kind of place in the curriculum, make a space for it in a curriculum to actually encourage the reading so they can learn empathy for each other. And I remember the comments that I had after writing an article, and some of them were quite vicious. So, what's that going to do? But I still strongly believe that the more we read, especially as children, the more empathy we will have. I mean, there's no doubt when I heard my father speaking about the Nancy stories and what that did for him and what hope it gave for him, indeed, reading can lend to empathy and more understanding of other. Because my father, when he came to London in 1954, he lived just off Colarbor Lane in central Brixton, and he lived in digs opposite the Carnegie Library, and that is where he met my mother. My mother came to the UK in 1961. And she lived around the corner from my dad. And she would also go to visit that library. And she wanted to find narratives about Africa, about the Caribbean, and so forth. And in fact, she's looking for Anansi stories. Because her older sister, she just had young children. They were under the age of 7. And so she wanted to find something for them to read, something they could identify with. And I think when you go around the world, we want affirmation of who we are, and we want our stories related to us. We want to know that our existence is not isolated, and we want to, it tells us about ourselves. It kind of informs us that, hey, we are important and we are valued. And I remember my mother telling me about, she's still alive. She's 90 this year. And she strongly believes that her love of reading is something that something she passed on to me, and I believe that too. And she also remembers when I was reunited with her. It took me a lot longer to trace her, and this is 2001 when I went out to Washington DC. And again, with just like my father, I wanted to know what informed her when she was a young girl. Growing up, she grew up in not too far from Ian Fleming's house. Ian Fleming called his house Goldeneye on the north coast of Jamaica. It's an incredibly beautiful part of Jamaica. And you've got James Bond Beach nearby, where Ursula Andress emerges from that incredible blue ocean. And my mother said to me that when she was 15, 16, she would walk past Goldeneye, and she would dream of being a journalist or a spy writer, just like Ian Fleming. And she wondered about his life and wanted to go inside that house so much to see his typewriter. She dreamed of seeing his typewriter. And my mother, a library wasn't close to her, so all she could read was the journals and newspapers that her father brought back from Kingston whenever he visited there once or once every 2 weeks. And she would read from first page to last page, that newspaper, and especially those cartoon strips that would entertain her at night. And sometimes she had to go outside to her veranda and read via light from fireflies. That's how basic it was. There wasn't no electricity in the remote part of Jamaica where she lived. And so this tells me that storytelling is in our genes. We need that as children to develop empathy and so many other things that informs us. So, and we're all like that. When I go to schools and teachers tell me that, this particular young person doesn't engage with books or doesn't read, they don't engage with storytelling, I often go into that classroom and I say, okay, when you leave school, when you're done with your friends and, the banter stops and you go inside your homes, what do you do? And they put up their hands, and one boy said, I play games. I watch Netflix. I might watch a film or whatever. Or I might watch a soap afterwards. EastEnders might come on. And when I say to them, well, okay, someone's got to write that. And I say, what do you mean someone's got to write it? I say, yes, indeed. Somebody's got to write that narrative for you to enjoy it, whether it's a cartoon, because somebody said they watch Itchy and Scratchy from The Simpsons. And I said, well, somebody's got to write that too. Somebody's got to come up with a narrative for you to enjoy that entertainment. And so as human beings, writing and storytelling is in our DNA. And of course, back in my father's day, people didn't have typewriters. Sometimes they didn't even have pencils. So it was relayed orally. And that is the African tradition going back hundreds or even thousands of years. And when you go back to prehistoric times, you can see narratives drawn on caves and other hard surfaces. And so it's always been part of our identity. It doesn't matter what part of the world you come from. And again, it serves that need for us as human beings to try and understand ourselves, to try and build empathy, to try and soothe children, to try and comfort children. You know, when Bob Marley sings, everything's going to be all right, you know, sometimes these narratives would serve that message that everything is going to be all right. Yeah, times might be hard, times might be grim, and there's going to be some difficult hurdles to overcome in all our lives. But storytelling can give us that balm. And with my work, that's always what I've been trying to do. Yes, I do try to highlight injustices and inequality. From the very start with Brixton Rock, that was published in 1999. And it's about a young mixed race boy just trying to find his way in the world. Really, he's me, because I was trying to find my way in the world, trying to find my identity, find my place, find my purpose. And even now, 20 years after that's published, sometimes young readers come up to me and say, yeah, Alex, I feel exactly the same way. So really, all I'm doing is doing what I did when I was 16, 17, 18, when I would go to a party in Brixton and pick up the microphone and try to perform a lyric. And usually these lyrics were about my daily existence. Like, I remember one of my first lyrics was about the complain neighbor. Obviously, when you're young, you don't care about how loud you play your music. But there was this neighbor about 3 doors away from me. About 2 o'clock in the morning, he would bang on our front door. He said, turn that boombox down or whatever. And I might have a few choice words to say. I say, look, you know, I'm playing music, I'm enjoying myself. If you want, you can come in and, you know, you could share a cake or whatever, or a drink. But no, he would not have it. And so one of my first lyrics was about this complain neighbor. He was 6'2" and wore stripy pajamas and wore a nightcap and so on. And but mind you, he loved Jamaican rum with Coke. I did mention that in a line or two. And so I guess it's the unheard stories that I was interested in, that I wanted to relate at the start of my career. The kind of stories that I wouldn't quite see in W.H. Smith or in Waterstones or Otticas or Books ETC, you know, the brand shops that are around at the time that when I was buying fiction. And those stories, even a complain neighbor, his story is just as important as anyone else's. And this is something that Simeon drilled into me. And he said to me, Alex, never believe that your story is not important. And he would say that to me day after day, especially when I was feeling a bit low, because sometimes when you're in that environment, there's certainly times when you just, oh God, this is not worth it. I cannot be bothered to get up in the morning and so on. But he would sit me down and say, Alex, look, things will get better. Things will definitely get better. And you just got to believe it. And he would tell me a parable from the Bible or something, or a parable from West Africa, something that he heard from his own parents. So again, that storytelling DNA that's within us, he released that and it balmed me and it soothed me. And this is the purpose, I think, of children's fiction. And of course, it can scare us. It can terrify us. It can moralize us when we're engaging with this storytelling, but it's necessary for our development. It really is. And sometimes when I look back on my life and my career, my mother often says that maybe I was meant to live this life so I could tell these untold stories. And maybe she's right, maybe she's wrong. I don't know, she's a very religious woman now. But, you know, stories came before Christianity, before these were there originally. Even in the case for that, I mean, there's been stories of the Great Flood way before Moses was meant to write that particular chapter in the Bible. You go to China and you hear legends about the Great Flood. You go to South Africa, you hear it there too. You go to Indonesia and you hear stories of this Great Flood. So in my mind, this Great Flood must have happened and somebody must have written about it. You go to India, and some of my heritage is in India. My mother's father was actually born in, I cannot remember the town, but southern India somewhere. And he brought to her the stories of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And again, it was told to children. And something that he told his children, my maternal grandfather. And again, it was used as a balm, a soothing kind of narrative to give hope to children and give children heroes that they can look up to. And so the fantasy that we see today, the sci-fi that we see today, it was all born from somebody trying to give moral lessons, to encourage, to talk about the heroes that have come before us, and to give us some kind of purpose in life, and to give us something to laugh at, to smile at, to feel sad at. And as I said, this is all pre-religion. And this is why I strongly believe it is part of our DNA. It is something that we cannot help but want to take part in, whether as a non-writer or as a writer or as a consumer of popular culture, whether it's even Love Island. Some people might laugh at why looking at Love Island, but at the end of the day, it does create its own narrative of boy meeting girl or girl meeting girl, boy meeting boy. What's going to happen? Are they going to get it together? No, no. Yes, yes, no. And so there's a certain narrative that plays out over the whole series that people would engage with. Coronation Street EastEnders, it works exactly the same way. There's a narrative there that people want to know the ending of. And so I'm so blessed to be a storyteller, you know, just like the old guys who would tell stories around the harvest fire back in the 1930s that my father witnessed, and even before his time. And I think it's quite a privileged place to be, and something I would do as long as I'm able. And it just gives me a thrill and a joy that somebody out there is reading my words and learning from my words. And through my words, I'm revealing my trauma, my pain, my happiness and joy, because I can't write in isolation. I can only write on the experiences that I've had, and I'm going to reflect that and mirror that on the page. And so really, in a strange way, I've taken up the baton, if you like, from my father, my mother, and all that's come before them, and all the people that have framed my narrative and informed my existence, you know, to Simeon and everybody else. And I'm replaying it for the generation coming up. And I cannot tell you how good that makes me feel. I feel very fortunate and feel very blessed. So, yes, there's storytelling in our DNA, and we should recognize it and bow to it and pass it on.